as you all know, these coffee lunch and learns are only possible due to the generous sponsorship. And so TST is our sponsor for the coffee lunch and learns for both March and April. So we have a short video about their products that we'll take a look at, and then we'll get to the program.
Truck System Technologies was founded in 2010, offering an affordable, reliable TPMS solution to an aftermarket and retrofit niche in the recreational vehicle market. In 2017, TST was acquired by Pressure Systems International. PSI is the global leader of automatic tire inflation systems for the commercial vehicle market for 18-wheelers as you know them. After the acquisition, PSI re-engineered TST's TPMS product to meet the grueling standards of the commercial vehicle market and also to meet the requirements to become an original equipment manufacturer, or OEM, factory-installed component in the RV market. In early 2018, Forest River began testing TST's TPMS system, and after over a year of scrutiny, TST received the approval stamp by Forest River and began talking to the various production lines within Forest River. TST is very proud to be the RV industry's first TPMS at the OEM level and is the only tire pressure monitoring system approved for use on OEM factory installation on every line at Forest River and Thor. TST, the RV industry's only standard OEM TPMS.
So thank you again to TST. We're able to do this because of their generous sponsorship. So customer service, are you part of the solution? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're very excited to have Troy Becktel with us. Troy has more than 30 years of experience in the RV industry, serving many years as the VP of Service for RV manufacturers. As a corporate executive coach, husband, father, and now grandfather, Troy has been blessed with many life lessons, paving the way to what right looks like. He believes that all situations, even the toughest ones, can help one grow and succeed with perseverance and determination. So we're really excited to hear what Troy has to say today. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Troy to get us started.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Monica. Hope everybody's doing good today. Sorry, I can't see everybody on the screen. I mean, this is new for me. I mean, I have spoken in front of large groups of people, but that's just it. I'm usually speaking in front of large groups of people. So to have everybody behind their monitor is new and different even for myself. Just a little bit of background about me. To Monica's point, I have been around the RV industry for a very long time. I go back to actually the late 80s when I was still in college and started with a company called Spartan Motors. And at that point, I was a young engineer. And, I made it up to director of engineering when our organization matured far enough that we needed a formalized department to represent our brand in the vein of service. And frankly, all I knew at that point about service is that when I left work, I was a consumer. So, I worked really pretty hard to understand the needs of our customer. I even took a psychology class that, we'll talk about some of how and why that fits, over the course of the next hour. But, what I would like to do is I do have a presentation, and before, we open this up today, I talked to Monica about how we share that out, because one thing I know from a classroom experience perspective is that frankly, I hope there's some we have a lot of aha moments, frankly, but I also hope that there are some things that, hey, maybe I'd like to refer back to, or I like what that slide said, or so on and so forth. So to provide that repository of information that you can come back to at a later date is pretty important as well. So, with that being said, let me see if I can just get a brief timeout to do a share screen. And there, I hope everybody sees, slide one of my presentation at this point. and I was able to get the RVWA logo from Monica, so that helps. So I personalized this presentation, just for the benefit of today's, speaking, if you will. And how did I, get involved with the RVWA? My wife and I recently made a move to this area, being originally from Michigan, actually, and we're starting an organization in Bristol. And when you saw me before, we're looking out at about 130,000 square foot facility in Bristol, where we're going to do PDI inspections to support the General RV brand of retail stores. And because of the nature of that business, I had originally met Susan Carpenter, actually, and said, hey, can you help me from posting the jobs out there and that kind of stuff. So that's how I got to know the organization a little bit. And then we sat down over dinner and talked about kind of our collective walks of life. We have a lot of similarity there, by the way. And I told her I'd be happy to. The last time I did this professionally, it was actually for a couple female chiropractors that have a practice in Holland, Michigan, and their office staff is a younger group of folks, and quite frankly, customer service, if you will, is just not something that is necessarily intrinsic to society anymore. If you're even close to my age, which I'm not going to tell you, but if you're even close to my age, there are some things that we grew up with, some common courtesy things like, excuse me or please and thank yous that have just kind of fallen off. And, those are the kinds of things that, I hope that, through this kind of sharing that, again, we have some of those aha moments, but, we can create a behavior worthy of emulation and to help, spearhead some of that activity. So, the first slide here, kind of embodies all things customer service. And I want to make sure that, my focus today is that I'm not, representing a department, but I'm more so representing a behavior and how we as individuals, can help to, represent ourselves or a brand or anything like that as we go. So really trying to provide tools for the toolbox of life with regard to interactions. So let's see. Oops, sorry. Had to figure out what key moved my slide. Sorry about that. So the first question is and always will be, do we truly know what the expectations of the customers are? And that customer can be in any area, right? So it doesn't matter whether we're, purchasing or supply chain or engineering or operations or customer service. It's really understanding the needs of the customer. And if we don't, what are we doing to get there from here? So, really, where do we start? Well, we start by the toolbox, and there's a systems toolbox that can help us get there from here, and there's a behavioral toolbox that can get there from here. And so it really, plays into an assessment, maybe getting out of the driver's seat long enough to make an evaluation of what that toolbox looks like and the needs for that. I got some things on the screen that can help us, but really, I think those needs are very individualized, at least from the systems side. My core focus today will be on the behavioral side, but from a systems side, as an organization, for example, are we set up to be customer centric? So do we recognize that without a customer that we kind of can't pay our bills? Or are we purposeful? Are we analytical? So are we reflective? And are we, using hindsight as a tool? All those kinds of things. Are we focused on solutions as opposed to, just, identifying the obstacles? Do we have a method of which, to provide, our associates with a customer portal? Are we purposeful with items like the FAQs, whatever business we're in? And what can that do? So you got your risk assessment and benefit, One of the when I was a vice president in service, the last stint was at Tiffin Motorhomes, but one of the reasons that we focused on FAQs was, quite frankly, to mitigate the number of calls that were coming into the call center. And so you start to analyze what those calls look like and what the most frequently asked questions are, and then we provide that information as purposeful as we can, and that helped us to reduce the call volume, and quite frankly make us more easy to do business with. Moving on though, so here we go. We're going to start talking about some of the behavioral analytics and how that represents you as either an individual or the team as an organization. And this is some of the research that I did when I first started in customer service was pretty broad. I really wanted to understand what makes people tick. How can we improve our service? Because prior to that point, at least in the organization that I was working in, if you were an employee of the organization, then it was your responsibility to support, the consumer or the customer being the person on your left or right. But once we had a very purposeful organization that was, a brand in and of itself, in my opinion, and the brand was service, and that loyalty that we were looking to build, I really wanted to make sure that we were a best in class environment. And so I went out and, like I said, I took a psychology class. I read a lot of the analytics. I got to do some great benchmarking. I spent a week or so with my friend Matt Utley at Newmar in Napanee, Indiana. I spent a week down in Texas with Pat Carr. I got the opportunity to go to the Chevrolet School for Service and the Ford Motor Company School for Service. And frankly, it was just with the approach that I'm going to walk away from that with some tools that we can steal shamelessly. So hopefully, that same thing provides an opportunity for you to do so as well today. So as we go through this list, if you haven't read ahead, it really only takes about 10 seconds. And that's a behavioral item that, if you really, think about, the cognizant side of how we process information and think, we're doing the same thing. And so I hope that in my first 10 or 20 seconds, I provided a friendly enough approach that, you're still here in listening. But, I think we have a subconscious piece of our brain that either has a relatable feature or you just shut people off. And the point is that happens naturally based on what makes you tick as an individual within about 10 seconds. From a buying habits perspective, and we'll talk about this more than once through the presentation, but over 60% of all consumers will purchase again from an organization after a positive service experience. And that's an important delineation, like I said, that we'll talk more about as we go. And here's one. I mean, because it's just easy to complain, and I think we all recognize that it's just easy to do so, that only about 30% of all people will actually share something positive. It's just easier to complain about it rather than to, hey, this organization or these people or what have you really, provided exemplary service or went above and beyond. From a phone interaction perspective, and I think the pandemic has really paved that way, so whether we're in a Zoom meeting like today or on the telephone, I mean, most of the interaction that we do today is electronic. And the point here is that we represent our brand. And again, our brand is our person, our department, our organization, in the typical interaction of about 4 minutes or less. When we did that, analytically in each of the areas that I've been, whether it's the Erwin-Heimer Group in Europe or Spartan Motors in Michigan or Tiffin Motorhomes, and now even with General RV, the average interaction with people on the telephone is about 4 minutes. So, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of time, and it's really not. But in that bandwidth of time, that's that first impression thing. We as individuals are representing our brand in that short period of time. So again, we have to make sure that what we do and how we do it is very purposeful. it almost goes without saying, but we are the face of our organization to our customers in everything that we do. And that's why, I will say as we go that the customer service is not a department, it's a behavior. It needs to be part of the lifeblood of how we operate. And I joke with this that sales will sell the first one, and sales in what area, whether that's maybe it's the chiropractic office that I supported in Holland, Michigan, or it's Newmar, that builds a nice motorhome product in Napanee, Indiana. But the people in the organization that represent that organization will sell everyone after that, absolutely. Or conversely, if they don't represent well, people have a choice, right? We the people that are in the RV industry, first of all, need to understand that we are in a nice to have business model, not a need to have. So our consumers have a choice, and part of the focus of today and everything that we do needs to be reflective with that in mind, and understand that all consumers in the industry have a choice to go somewhere else if we don't represent our brand well. As we move on, I got to know a guy that used to be the president of Newmar. His name was Virgil Miller. And I'm sorry, I don't know all of you, but some of you may know Virgil or knew Virgil when he was with us, God rest his soul. But when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, instead of taking off and spending his last time with his family, one of the things that I admired most about him was his perseverance to make sure that his organization was left in good hands. And he went out and interviewed a number of people. One of the people that he interviewed was a gentleman named Dick Parks. And Dick was at the time working for Fleetwood Corporate out of Riverside, California. And he flew Dick in to Napanee and was going to do some interviews with his own leadership team that, for the most part is still intact today. But I was pretty humbled at the time working at Spartan, and I was called and asked to come down and interview Dick. And I was like, wow. So first of all, I'm a supplier, at Spartan Motors, but sure, I'll come down and interview him. So I head down there and I waited, and it was funny because I got to tell you, I felt like I was sitting in the principal's office, sitting in a chair, waiting my turn kind of thing. But I went in and I spent time with Dick, and Dick told me, he says, Troy, he says, I didn't know, if or when I'd get the opportunity to meet with you, but, why it's relevant is because, when you're interviewing to be the successor of the president of an organization, typically you're going to do some kind of presentation like, lean inventory, or how nimble you can be from changes, or, your innovation, or the list goes on, right? Well, Dick made a choice, and his presentation that day was customer service and the need to be really good at it. And one of the things I took away from that conversation that day was, really embodied in this slide right here. And that was, he had provided me a small sheet, and on that sheet, it spoke to, the buying habits in the RV industry. And I was, of course, this goes back a little bit of time, but I think it's still relevant today. And that it was, the grading scale was 1 to 5. And really what it said was that if you are solicited for feedback and you rate an organization at a level of a 5, and so this is kind of a luxury purchase. Think of the last thing you bought. Maybe it was a new television or a car, or whatever that looked like. But the organization you purchased it from, if you rated them a 5, then the likelihood that you would do business with them again is only about 85%. And I say only about, but there's still some margin in there between 85 and 100%. So 85% of those people would do business with you again. And that's rating you a 5. So on the screen, that's great customer service. So average customer service picks up first at 4 and goes down from there. But I just want you to be ready for this, you know, the analytics that came with this. And this was, you know, I don't know, 30, 50,000 respondents, if you will, but it went from 85% down to 52% just between a 5 and a 4. And this speaks to the loyalty of that brand. So if you bought that new pickup truck or that new car or that new RV or that new Samsung television, whatever it was, and you only rated them a 4, you know, that speaks to the loyalty that you would have with that brand to buy from them again. And so all of a sudden, that's saying at a 4, you're only about 52% likely to not shop that commodity the next time you buy because you've rated them a 4 or lower. And then, you know, anything less than that, you know, you might as well wrote your own organization off, or, you know, however you represent. So, I mean, to me, this is almost ear piercing that if you're not willing and able to, you know, represent yourself, your organization at a 5 or higher, then you're at risk. That's the message. So, you know, you may ask yourself then, so what do customers want? Well, ironically, it's the same thing that you want. So that's how simple this is. I mean, the secret sauce to great customer service is the golden rule. And then we'll just expand on that in the time that we have remaining. But what do our customers desire? Well, they desire that we're friendly and that we're honest and that we're timely, that we're fair. And what does fair mean? Well, it's never wrong to do the right thing, right? That we're participatory. And participatory, and we'll talk about this more, but participatory can mean being a good listener. You know, and you know, I will tell you that my wife had an interview this morning, and she just I called her to say, hey, how'd it go, and you know, that kind of stuff, and she said, well, it was obvious that it was a very mechanical environment, and so with that being said, you know, you think of that, you know, interaction and the opportunity to improve in that, and you know, obviously the receiver felt like the other person wasn't really participatory, because you know, part of that give and take is that ability to be a good listener and participate actively. You know, Monica and how she produced this for me, I mean, it was very purposeful that it was, you know, are you part of the solution, right? And that is a big piece, because as we look at people, I think that, you know, really, and we all know them, you know, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. So there's that person that's going to come in and say, see, I told you so. I mean, there's the ones that are pointing out the problem, right? But on the other side, you know, you're looking for those people that, you know, want to be part of the solution. They're solutions focused, you know, and that those, frankly, at least from my perspective, those are the kinds of people I like to surround myself with. Those are the kinds of people that I know are not just going to wait for a problem to boil over before they bring it to me. And quite frankly, also the people that can help me, because, you know, one of the first things that I've recognized as an industry leader is that I can't do it by myself, won't do it by myself. I need to surround myself with people that feel appropriately empowered to help me through anything, you know. And so I look for people that, you know, part of their focus is to be part of that solution. And then the last thing is to over communicate. And there's some tips and tricks as to how to do that and do that successfully. And we'll talk more about that as well. Having not done this before, and obviously that I can't see your face, and if you're holding your hand up, put it down, because I can't see that either. You know, but if there's any questions, you know, anytime, please ask away.
Yeah, and they're in the chat as well. Our group's pretty engaged in the chat. So if you want to ask anyone questions, I should have told you this earlier. You can say, like, put a 1 in the chat, and this group is great at engaging there.
Yep, good. All right. Well, then we'll keep going. You know, so as we go, I mean, you can only expect to get out of something what you're willing to put in it, right? And I think if we think about that, just make it kind of go, but I think that, is reflective of, what it really takes. And quite frankly, the intrinsic value of how you want to be treated, falls into that as well. But, doing that successfully really doesn't mean anything more than, giving it your best, doing the right thing, working every day to be revered as easy to do business with. That kind of stuff is represented here. And quite frankly, being a good student of business helps as well. It's, one of the lines here is discovering new ways to delight those you serve. Well, and being a good listener and adapting to that, culture, that work environment, that customer need, all those things. So regardless of what area of your responsibility that you fall into, will help you to be successful there. 10 rules for great customer service begin with a commitment to do the right thing, quite frankly, and in demonstrating, a positive environment, whether that's a work environment, whether that's the tone of voice you're using. I will tell you that, when I was interviewing for call center techs, the first thing I did actually before I ever brought them in was I did a phone screen. And why did I do a phone screen? Because I wanted to hear them on the phone. I wanted to hear how they talked. I wanted to hear, how they articulated thought. I wanted to hear their tone of voice. I wanted to make sure that it was clear, because I knew that if they had any opportunity to be successful in our business, that I needed to know what the customer would hear on the other end of the phone. So that's how I started. And then you can bring them in and start getting some of those, personality traits, their walk of life, their experience, what tools they have in their toolbox to bring with them. The next thing there is do what you say and say what you do. I think we all want to be integrity based, but quite frankly, it kind of falls into one of the tenets that I would teach at the customer service level. And that was, hey, excuse me, if we don't do it, who will? Right? So, it is carrying that baton, and it is being purposeful. I remember I used to work for a guy named John Steekiel, and he was the CEO at Spartan for a time, and he and I hired in together, and still a good friend of mine. But he taught me this, I'm going to say in like 2000 or something like that. He called me one day and he says, Troy, where are we with this? And the first thing that came to my head was, I don't know, I'm waiting for so-and-so. Well, the first thing I learned with that interaction and exchange was that was the wrong answer, that I was waiting for, right? And because I didn't have a plan, I didn't have an actionable plan. And that was like a follow-up protocol. And frankly, had I known the urgency needs of my customer, which in that case was my boss, as well as the problem we were trying to solve, so I had a better understanding of the follow-up protocol, then I would have never said that. And so that's that needs-based agenda that we all have to make sure that we understand. And it's one of those, hey, if we don't understand, we need to learn to ask. And so that's why I said, I've been a student through this whole process, and as I go, I've collected my own notes, and this slide deck today is kind of reflective of that. So again, I hope it helps. Know your customers. And when I say know your customer, I'm talking about being appropriately empathetic, not sympathetic. Appropriately empathetic, being a good listener. Sometimes being a good listener is occasionally, and if you've been through any of this training before, sometimes it's a little bit of repeating what has been said to you, right? So that demonstrates the fact that you're engaged, you're listening, and then, occasionally those appropriate questions as well. Treat others with courtesy and respect. Make sure that every interaction that we're leaving a good impression, that we ask questions along the way. We're not accusatory and we don't interrogate. That's the first thing, is that, nobody wins in an argument, right? So we just don't want to engage in that practice. We don't want to be part of that practice. People will want to be. There will be those complainers. There will be those people that are quote unquote part of the problem. But that's not what we want to do, and that's not who we want to be. So we have to be that, even keeled, level-minded, the voice of reason, all those kinds of things. And then as we look at bullet number 5 there, the last statement in red, I think is one of the most important, and that is that we spend our time and focus on what we can do versus what we can't. When I spent a long time in each of those RV companies that I was with, where I would do, some of the cases of escalation. And when I would do those cases, I would always make sure that before I picked up the phone, that I kind of had that plan A and plan B in mind. So I knew where I was going. Now that was an advantage for me because those were very purposeful engagements. You're not always going to have that luxury, but just as an example, I'm sharing. And, and one of the things I would do along the way is that I would ask my customers to sleep on it. So, hey, I've got these ideas. This is kind of the thought process with regard to resolution. Instead of giving me that boom, what do you think? I would say, hey, sleep on it and let's talk again tomorrow. But instead of, just answering with no or what have you, I would always focus on what I was empowered to do or how I was empowered to support a problem. Don't leave customers hanging. So this goes back to that story with my friend John Steekiel at Spartan Motors. It was my job, my role, my responsibility, A, to understand his needs, and B, to execute on that appropriately. And that is to be purposeful. Earlier I said, to make sure that we own it, because if we don't, who else will? So, it's so important that regardless of your role in an organization, if you tell anybody, hey, in this case, hey, Monica, I'm going to call you by noon tomorrow, I better call her by noon tomorrow. If I call her at 2, I appropriately expect that she's going to be upset with me. And I have no way of knowing whether she'll be available to me at that point. So do what you say what you do, don't leave customers hanging. Always providing what you promise. That's the next thing. Failure to resolve in this is really a credibility issue. And that goes back to, we are the face of the organization when we are the ones interacting with said customer, right? So recognize that we own we're the make it or break it for whatever product or service we represent. When we're the ones interacting with the customer. Now the customer may be, the best supplier in town that we want to keep, or, the customer but always recognize, and by the way, we could be the reason for losing a great employee based on how we treat them. So that engagement relationship opportunity, rises and falls by our ability to interact. The next one is assume that customers are telling the truth. We want to make sure that we approach every situation, with a tone and approach, how we wordsmith our responses, that we don't just assume that, people are lying, because I will tell you as a customer, and think about our life, right? Think about all the things that we have to babysit as a consumer today, the insurance. I mean, we moved here recently. You guys already know that. So, we have to get our license plates changed to the state of Indiana. And I will tell you that has been a mountainous task to do so. And my wife's pickup happens to be leased through Ford Motor Company, and getting Ford Motor Company to understand that, that we actually need the title to get a license plate here has been a task. So it has been trying my patience and all of my customer service skills to interact with Ford Motor Company. Just throwing it out there. But and it gives all those interactions to me, and part of the intro that Monica did for me. Those are the situations that give you the tools, because if you note that stuff to memory, then you'll remember what not to do. or how not to be treated, how you don't want to be treated, and you use those as actually positive reinforcement as we move forward. The next one is, focus on making customers, not numbers. I have always had, part of the call center and the service organizations I have represented, what I call seasonal months. Months where, customers are moving and shaking and my call rate went up, and I remember I had a gentleman, Charlie Fisher, great guy, called me when he retired, thanking me for, our friendship, etc. But within 6 months of starting for me, he was a supervisor on the call center floor. But one of the things I knew is that he had a heart so big that he wanted to take every call. He never wanted to see that abandon rate ticking up, which is really the calls missed in the call center. So he tried really hard. And so I knew that as we got into that seasonality, that I needed to bring Charlie in and do a little coaching session with him and remind him that we're about making customers, not numbers. And it was okay for a call to go into the voicemail as long as we, got the message and responded appropriately and provided the same time and interest in that customer as that we did with the one that was on the phone. So we never shortchanged those customers. And I think that counseling helped. I believe it did, because he kept his sanity. So that's a good thing. And the last thing here is to be easy to do business with. I mean, it needs to be one of those things, from my perspective, when I interviewed with General RB, last September, I just told him, I said, this is the kind of thing that you want on your wall. This is the kind of thing that needs to be part of the, your purpose for living, if you will. It goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that, at least from my perspective, and I don't know that all you guys are in the RV industry, I just can't say that. But if you are, then you recognize the fact that we are in a nice to have business climate, and if that climate were to shift, I mean, I know we're selling a lot of units right now, which is a great and wonderful thing. But if that were to shift and it were to become a lot more competitive, then only the strong will survive. And the strong may be the service brand that we have collectively made via being purposeful with interacting with others. And so we hope it's all of us, right? So follow the golden rule. And from an interaction perspective, I will tell you, this goes back to some of the psychology that I shared that I would talk more about as we went. But one of the things that I learned through that class, quite frankly, was it is what you say and how you say it that matters, because it goes back to that, the receiver of information's perception is their reality. And so, even as a speaker, if I fill my words with ums and ahs and just fillers all the time, then quite frankly, I believe subconsciously that you will question my knowledge, the competency in what I'm sharing with you today, that kind of thing. So, you want somebody to speak purposefully and rhythmically, if you will. As we talk about these items, Lo, I think it makes sense, but we'll go through them quickly. I mean, you don't want to just say, I don't know. If you're a mother or father and you got children, how many times have you heard, I don't know, wasn't me, right? I didn't do it, and so as we think about, how we respond to stuff, we want to make sure that we kind of have that friendly tone and say, you know what, I don't know, but I'll find out. Let me help you. Let me help you through that process. It's that accepting, engaging, that it's that handoff. I want the ball and I will carry the ball kind of attitude that will persevere. I trained every single year. We did a repeat every single year in my former lives where I trained my staff to never say no. No was not a necessary word in the businesses I served. It just wasn't. Focus on what you can do. Focus on solutions and options. You don't have to say no. So I worked really hard on that, because no is just one of those words that will shut people off. If somebody is coming to you looking for alternatives and your response is no, then hopefully you're a mother or a father and you're talking to your child that they can't have that candy bar. Because if it's anything more than that, then it's probably not a word that needs to be in our vernacular. That's not my job is the next one on the list. And quite frankly, today in our competitive culture, in our society today, the boundaries, the silos, the job descriptions from the 80s, they're gone, right? That's not my job, just cannot be. I did 2.5 years with a company called General Motors back in the 80s. And, I was a salaried employee and I got to interact with the UAW. And that interaction, there were people in the UAW that said, that's not my job because of their conditions of employment. It's a very different environment. I will say, at least my personal, that's not where I fit. So with that kind of thing in mind, those boundaries don't work for Troy Becktel. So that's not my job, is not something that works for me, works for, well, quite frankly, the organization that I'm sitting in right here, right now. Earlier I said be empathetic and not sympathetic, right? So if you're like, wow, yeah, no, that's really bad. I mean, that could kill somebody. If you get on that bandwagon, probably went too far. Just throwing it out there. That's not where we need to go. So we need to reel that in a little bit, be appropriately empathetic. So remember that we're supporting ourselves, our brand, our organization, whatever that looks like. But unless you're talking about your buddy about their car accident last night or whatever, we don't have to go there. From a psychology perspective, I would implore you to not tell people to calm down. Now, having said that, that does not mean that anybody at any time needs to be treated unfairly, unjustly, inappropriately, be sworn at, be called names, anything like that. And everybody, every department, every organization will have their boundaries for that. But, in my world, I've always told people, hey, put that person on notice. Let them know that I don't have to be called names. But I just tell them, I said, look, it's not for you to tell the person to calm down. Just put them on notice. Hey, I know you're upset, but you don't have to call me those names. If you would like my help, then that's why I'm here. But if we can't get there from here, then I reserve the right to disconnect. And that is how I have trained, at least in my past life. And if you don't know what that looks like for you and your organization, then quite frankly, I think you should ask. I mean, those boundaries should be clear and well understood. And the last thing is just shuffling off. From my past life experience, I would always try to engage with the customer, back to that ownership piece. Try to advocate for the customer, keep the customer on board and help them. If you get into well, I want you to do this, or I really can't help you. Here, take this phone number and you call them. That's not being part of the solution. That, in a customer's eyes, got to take yourself out of your seat for a minute and put yourself in a customer's eyes. That's not being easy to do business with. And subconsciously, they're probably thinking, man, they're part of the problem. They're not helping me at all. So, always think about not only what you say, but how you say it, because you can go a long way or, end a relationship almost abruptly. Moving on here. Maybe. Okay, here we go. So I talked about this already a little bit, but it is the fillers. Part of our business when I was at Spartan Motors was fire trucks, and a friend of mine was an engineer, but he also well-versed engineer, and he spoke at EVT functions, which is emergency vehicle technology functions, and it wasn't anything more than he knew his business very well, but when he got up in front of a group of folks, he just wasn't comfortable. And his name was Mark. And so, one day I was sharing with him, and I had asked him to spend some time actually watching public speaking. And he's like, well, why do I need to do that? And I said, well, and by the way, I would never do this in a million years if he and I weren't personal friends. But I asked him to do that, and I said, I want you to take away and be an objective listener, because what I'm looking for is how you perceive that person's knowledge of the subject matter based on how they talk to you about it. And what the takeaway was is that those people speak fluently. They don't have a lot of fillers, that kind of stuff. So quite frankly, sometimes it's better to say nothing at all than it is to, just look for those fillers. But from a customer service perspective, so those are some great ideas to train. If you're a trainer in your organization or anything like that, is to, there are those people that they have that tick. Insert word there. They like to repeat it. Sometimes maybe it's but or but they have that tick, and that can be counterproductive to how customers perceive them, and it might be something, if you know them well enough, to offer some advice to help them through it. So who are customers to our business, or who are customers to us, or to how we interact? Well, quite frankly, they're the most important part of our business. They are why we are here, quite frankly, and they are not dependent on us. We're dependent on them. So if you think about it in that context, they were, for the 4 walls that we serve, whether it's from 7 to 4 or 5:30 to 2 or 8 to 5, whatever that schedule looks like for you, I mean, they're the purpose of living for while we are there, and not an interruption of our work, but rather the purpose for it. And quite frankly, the fact that they have chose to interact with us at whatever interval or time is a favor. It's an opportunity for us to cement that partnership that maybe they didn't have before they called or came in to see us. It's really that opportunity to create or generate that loyalty that, hey, they can go down the street. So it's our opportunity. Make sure that we become our customer's first choice. From a complaint handling perspective, if you're around marketing or know anything about it, frankly, it costs about 6 times more money to invest in new customers than it does just to keep the ones that we have. And frankly, as we look at some of this stuff, I've spoke to a lot of it already, but one down the list a little bit, 95% of customers will do business with you again if you can resolve their issue right there on the spot. I mean, some of this stuff, it's just a reinforcement of behavior that as we interact with our customers, it's so important that, we help them through, we accept and own those areas of responsibility. And again, we're part of the solution. Here's a pie chart that, so the analytics that I talked to you about earlier, some of the stuff that I got from my friend Dick Parks, that's still at Newmar, but it shows us here that the reason that people leave, look at that, 70% left as a result of poor service, and that goes above price, that goes above content, that goes above just the simple fact that we build mechanical beings that can and will break. It was interactions with the organization that left customers to choose a pathway elsewhere with regard to their next purchase decision. So pretty important stuff. I think it weighs pretty heavily on our need in the business climate to be supportive in whatever area we serve. The non-quantitative facts about service is that, quite frankly, in a culture of instant gratification, one of the things I want everybody to recognize is, as humans, for just a moment, that we are instinctively drawn to feeling like we're being listened to or that we have value, right? So if we think about it in that context, we are better than armed to serve and support our customers, knowing that if we provide great customer service, our customers, much like ourselves, appreciate that. They want that. They want that sense of belonging, that sense of loyalty, that sense of need. And with that, then that we can cement that partnership, in the years to come. And that, communication is king. We cannot fix what we don't know is broken. Again, that's another. I got 5 kids of my own. It's one of those parental things, but it works. And strangely enough, it works at work too. So hopefully those kinds of things help. From a customer delight perspective, it's really, it's the wow piece, and one of the small synergistic things that we do at work here, is we have a wow group, and that's the war on waste, and really implore our staff members to participate actively and have a reward system in place just to do things like improve service, improve interaction, improve process. Any or all those kinds of things can and will matter as we move forward. From a complaint handling perspective, we talked about it earlier, but really, at the end of the day, what we want to do and do well is be active and good listeners, and be both patient and persistent, because if we don't own it, who will? Recognize that our level of empowerment is bound by our ability to support the customer, if you will. We always want to engage with our customers and be part of the solution. We've talked about that. We've talked about focus on what you can do versus what you can't. But, from a public speaking perspective, I will tell you that we want to tell them what we're going to tell them. We want to tell them, and we want to tell them what we told them. So we're going to go back through this to hopefully to have it be instilled in the days and weeks and years to come. And frankly, provide you the tools to train on some of this kind of stuff. It's never wrong to do the right thing, right? I think we could all get an amen to that. And then above all is to be a great listener. That is the first thing, in the first step, quite frankly, of providing exceptional customer service or exemplary customer service. Just a quick story real quick. This young man on the screen, his name's Cooper Rush. And I had the honor of coaching him in football. And from a complaint handling perspective, the story I'll tell you is that, everybody's a beginner at some point. And he was a gifted young man and ahead of his time. And so when you have skill like that as a very young man, maybe not everybody around you has the same level of skill, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need them. Right? On the football field, it takes 11 people to defend the ball or to move the ball forward. And so when you're a young man with a lot of talent, and sometimes you get a little fired up about that kind of stuff, and Cooper, was like some other ones. So actually, I got to update this because he's now with the Chiefs, but he got fired up too, and he started to lose rapport with his own teammates. And so we really had to reel that behavior back in and have a little, what I'll call humble pie, even at a very young age, for him to understand that it takes 11. He's never going to walk out on that field by himself at any given time. And frankly, he was obviously a good student of the game himself. And I think he's doing pretty good for himself. So good for him. We started the presentation today talking about, this slide right here and how, only, and I say that loosely, only 85% of people will do business with you again if you receive a grade of a 5 on a scale of 1 to 5. And then it drops off down to 52% at a 4. I think it's so important to understand how every interaction that we have, with our customers, with our associates, et cetera, with our vendors, is at risk. It's based on what we do and how we do it. And quite frankly, I used to say, look, when we're in business, we can't afford to have a bad day. When we come into work, whether it's the tone of our voice or whether they're looking at you in the eyes, you have to have a smile on your face. You have to be engaging and approachable. you know, and be revered as such, you know, quite frankly, to represent ourselves in service. What's next, you know, from a customer and product support perspective, and that goes to, you know, all of what we do. I think, you know, it's in practicing, right? You know, when I was vice president of service, you know, my tagline was the first one there, and I italicized it, and says, you know, we're a services business that just happens to build highly innovative luxury RVs. And I meant that because I believe that the brand is, there's more weight to the brand with regard to relationships than there are the products themselves. The products might bring them there to look, but our ability to draw them in will be based on our interactions. And so whether you're in the RV industry or another industry, it doesn't really matter. Our ability to engage with them and the demonstration of that relationship building is what will keep them. I'll leave you with those tenets there, you know, and quite frankly, you know, a common thread to always, you know, have a desire to become the most desired brand. Sorry about that. Get back on. And that's all I have for today. If there's not any questions, I really want to, you know, thank Monica and everybody that's on for their time, and look forward to meeting more while I'm here.
So we actually have a lot of questions, but that your presentation was so great. So we'll see if we can, maybe I don't know, there were quite a few here. So you don't have to answer this, but I think we may need to have you back to cover some of these other areas. You know, what recommendations do you have to strengthen the customer service relationship with our customers when the customer service team is out of state? I'm just going to run through these so you can kind of get a feel.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Can you address how to deal with a problem customer? Maybe someone who's angry that the RV isn't ready when it's supposed to be. And you definitely hit on a number of those with your top 10 tips. People saying excellent presentation with the real world scenarios. How many companies support their customer service staff, both support and financially? Sometimes it costs money to do what's right. What is your method for training customer service staff? So there's a lot here. So I don't know if I think you covered a lot of it in your presentation, but there may even be an opportunity.
Yeah. And I like the idea of maybe having you back, Troy, if you're willing, because I think everybody was extremely engaged in this, and they definitely have some great questions. And I think you can go a little bit deeper in some of this stuff, and people would love it.
Well, and honestly, I apologize that I didn't see the questions as they came up. You know, and when I clicked on the button, by God, there they were, and I apologize for that. But I'd be happy to. I mean, and maybe it's a subset group where it's just question and answer. I mean, I'm happy to walk through that. You know, I've you know, trained staffs for years. I mean, I would have direct answers to the financial question that Monica cited. Because I think it is germane and it's very relevant, and that understanding has to be part of the solution, you know, to get there from here. So you guys just tell me, and I'd be happy to, Susan.
Awesome.
Well, you were on such a roll. I didn't want to. They were coming in, but I didn't want to interrupt you because you had such great content. So I think there's some nods from some people we can see, but I love that idea of a Q&A, and we could start with these questions that we already have. So, well, thank you. We're pretty much at time. And so thank you again to TST for being our sponsor. Make sure you guys check them out. We have recorded today, so we're going to post that on the website as well as these slides. So thank you again, Troy. So much great information. And I think there's definitely a lot of actionable items that the group here can take away from your presentation today.
Okay.
With that, we're gonna say goodbye and hope everyone has a really great weekend.
All right.